Yes, okay. Thank you, Samjoko Magazine and Todd. My name is Paola Caronni, and the poem I chose is from my collection Uncharted Waters. It's in the last section, and it's about writing, and it's about the point of view of a pencil when a poet or a writer writes something. So yeah, it was inspired uh, by a news about a person from Australia who has a job is a pencil sharpener. So I was quite struck by this idea, and so the poem itself is called Pencil Sharpening. Use me, your stick of wood and graphite, to slip words of passion under her pillow. As she opens her eyes, sees her sleek hair. Before you shave mine, roll her curls around my hips and coil them on top of her head in a nest of silky butterflies. Grip me to prod her finger or to leave a rosy dot on her skin. When all you wrote for her has lost its voice, scrape it away with that useless pink eraser that will last half my time or less. You may feel as if love is like that appendage, a cheat. It's there, subsuming you, but unable, unwilling to comfort. When a stub of bent metal replaces the last rubber shavings, dust of the past, grip my hand. Rivet it to those phrases. A faint yellow wrinkle carved on paper will cover your missteps. Let me flip like an acrobat and strike a smudge line over the last paragraph. Sharpen me then, so that I will look shorter but leaner, walking on high heels again. And when your nights are white, I'll fill them with redolent reverie before sneaking out of your life on tiptoe. For me, poetry is like entering another world through the real one, because by observing what happens around me and inside myself, I create a new space that I'd like to share with other people, or sometimes not. So I would say that poetry to me, it's a door to a bigger alley, just to, yeah, metaphorically speaking. Yeah, so the theme is, widely speaking, exploration, travel, discovery of uncharted waters in terms of places I traveled to and lived in, including my motherland, because no matter how long you live in a place, there will always be unknown areas or situations and uncharted waters or territory. So in general, I have a fascination with water. Therefore, water can be found in many forms in my poetry collection. And I would say that it's an important element for the poem itself. But as I say, it's exploration of territories seen in many, many ways. So the other bigger theme, and I would say bigger metaphor of uncharted waters, is about the deep ocean represented by the English language, which is a foreign language I decided to use for my book instead of writing in my mother tongue, which is Italian. So I would say that this is a continuous, fascinating, and at times scary ocean of learning. And you will always be learning in process. Yeah, so this is for me my first poetry collection, and I decided based on the different parts of the book. So starting with Hong Kong, which is the first part, I follow a chronological order. So I thought it would make sense to talk about or write about Hong Kong from my first arrival to nowadays. The second part is about other places I visited. So I group my poems written in or about those places. This is maybe, this is also, I would say, following chronological order, but not strictly. And the third part is about Italy. And here, yes, I wanted to go from my childhood to nowadays. So I would say chronologically. Whereas the last part, no, because it's general musings and reflections. So for this, I picked the poems I felt closer to in terms of themes like love, life, motherhood, or human, situations or troubles and things like that. So yeah, I would say mainly for the places that are closer to my heart, like Hong Kong and Italy, I follow chronological order. For the other two, partly, but for the last part, definitely not. It's just general themes. Yeah. So I would say that, as you know, it's very important to read poetry as a first step. Then I would definitely suggest not to write in an overly sentimental manner. Try to be economical with words, adjectives, or any other not necessary, not something that's not necessary for the development of the poet itself. Avoid abstract concepts and try to use imagery instead. And then also try to think of whether people can actually visualize your poem if you want to give the kind of idea through the poem, and if what you have written can generate any emotions in them. I think it's more difficult to tell for this part because many times it happened that we've written a poem and we feel, wow, this should be the best poem I've ever written. It should be so good sometimes, right? But maybe it's only good for us and not necessarily for the other. Then I would say that sharing poems and getting opinion is useful from fellow poets, but only if done with people who are truly interested in what you do, because people are busy, they go on with their life, and sometimes it's like, oh, yeah, send it to me, oh, we take a look if I have time, blah, blah, blah. So I think it's important to identify people who are truly interested in what we are doing. Treasure their suggestion, but also remember that the last decision is always our decision. I think absolutely important to read the poem twice in a row, because the first reading sometimes is like, oh, what is this? And then we read it the second time, maybe a bit slowly, and we understand that a lot of details come up, and we try to understand maybe who is the persona of the poem, what is the message that is going through the poem. And it's true, sometimes there are very obscure poems that we appreciate, maybe not much for what we understand or not understand, but for the way they are written or the words they use. So we should think that we always have to understand 100% about poem, right? So so if you think about, I don't know, The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, if we don't have explanation, we wouldn't understand much, I think, right? So but we still, we still appreciate the way he wrote this fantastic poem. And the other important thing, I think, in the reading of the poem is that we are allowed not to like what other people like. So maybe people say that, this poem, wow, this poem is so good, just come out the book, and we rush and buy the book, and then we are like stuck at the second page. I think what is very important, especially when we choose what to read, is to identify some common point with what we like if we are just readers, or what we would write if we are writers. At least that is what I do. Then I also read poems of authors who are not necessarily, I don't feel maybe that close connection because I'm curious, but I think it's very important, especially at the beginning, to identify something that would fit our, preferences as a poet or as a reader. Yeah, so I would talk about two different things. I would talk about the poet, and I would talk about poem from someone else, just to maybe have a small comparison. So the list could be quite long because there are many exemplary poems. As if I think about Italy, for instance, I think about Ungaretti, who's famous for very economical and condensed poems, and he wrote poems also during the First World War. But I would like to talk about rather a contemporary poet whom I admire a lot, and I think she's now becoming more and more famous. Her name is Tishani Doshi, and she's a poet of Indian and Welsh origins. I remember reading her poem that came out on Granta, and the title was Tissue. And I love it so much because of the condensation of things. So basically, In general, so from that, I purchased all her book, including her 2 books of fiction. I kind of felt a connection, and if I have to sum up her poetry, I think that it's sensual, intelligence, because she's a very well-read poet, up to date with different facets of life and happenings in the world, but is generally a macrocosm in a microcosm. She's condensing so many things in a poem. And very well written, always touching, very witty sometimes, or dramatic, incredible imagery. And I love the fact that a lot of her poems are very connected to Asian culture and religions, maybe because she lives in India. So it's something I feel, I feel really connected to. But if we are talking about maybe a poem, just to talk about someone everyone should know, who's Wisława Szymborska, right, the Nobel Prize winner from Poland. If we think of a poem like View with a Grain of Sand, we are talking about a poem which is very simple in its language. It's written very clearly, and at the same time with satire. She writes about, so she basically writes about our attitude to only trust our empirical perspective and label the things as we please. So, for instance, we say that the grain of sand is a grain of sand, but the grain of sand doesn't know that it's called grain of sand. So basically, in one poem, she put the whole philosophical quandary, Buddhist concept of, about, the existence of things as we label them. So well described through the metaphor. So that's why I think, for instance, this is a very good example of how in a poem we can touch very deep subjects and do it in the most simple manner. So this is what I admire about this poem, basically. Yes. Well, now I'm working on poems. I don't have yet ready a collection. Maybe I can say that if people are interested in this book, is on Amazon, any Amazon store in the world, and then stay tuned. I'm still working on a few things.